Alrighty everyone, welcome back. We are getting closer to the end of June of 2023, which is when the release date of the Indiana Jones franchise comes to a close on June 30th. A lot of fans are extremely skeptical about what's about to happen with the Dial of Destiny based on the reviews at Cannes Film Festival and what we talked about here with the spoilers surrounding Indiana Jones himself, Helena, and more, and everything else associated with Star Wars by, of course, Kathleen Kennedy, such as the Acolyte and Skeleton Crew. This is Mike Zero. Subscribe if you're new and like this video to see future Star Wars updates. I'm also on Twitter at Mike01. I thank you all so very much for the great and kind support. And without further ado, let's get right into the subject. Now, we do know that as of right now, Kathleen Kennedy's in a real tough spot. Like, probably one of the most complex spots in her life because of what's been happening with the Star Wars franchise, what happened with Willow, and what is about to happen to the Indiana Jones franchise. And it really is not a good image at all, not just for herself, but also for her peers around her, like those like Leslie Headland, and yes, even John Watts, who's working on Skeleton Crew, who wants to basically Marvelize Star Wars, and I don't believe it's gonna work. But moving on to the next big thing here, this is where things begin to get quite intense. Now, we do know one thing, we talked about this before, about how there's a lot of major Hollywood studios out there that are growing by the number week by week, that are literally restricting Kathleen Kennedy from ever working with them in the future. It is what some people like to call a specific type of a list, but that's not what they call it nowadays. But she is, of course, restricted by these major Hollywood studios. And what's going on with all of this has a lot more to do with the new studios that have restricted her based on more projections for Indy 5 and its box office trajectory. Now, on top of this, what's interesting is that with Kathleen Kennedy now going through more issues with projects like Indy 5, Acolyte, and Skeleton, a recent development involving Kennedy's issues with Hollywood recently got worse. As of late, many Hollywood studios have been restricting Kathleen Kennedy from ever getting the opportunity to work with them based on the failure of how she handled Star Wars, Willow, and now the latest Indiana Jones. Now, Indy 5 was described to be the last straw. To add to the list, more studios are standing up against Kennedy. The full list now includes the following of a mixture of Hollywood studios and even broadcast channels that have restricted her, such as DreamWorks, MGM, Miramax Films, Castle Rock, RKO Pictures, TriStar Pictures, United Artists, Lionsgate, NBC, CBS, 20th Century Studios, and the most recent of all, Skydance Media. The list is reportedly growing, like I said, week by week, that has been getting out of hand and out of there via Frank Marshall, which holds many connections with all these studios, that has been trying to work out a deal to give Kathleen Kennedy a future for one of those studios after Lucasfilm to expand her legacy as she doesn't really plan to retire from the film industry at all. Now, let me just stop here quick. Now, what's really crazy about this is that this is very near similar to what we saw happen, many years ago, where we had, of course, Disney buying out Lucasfilm, and a lot of studios were kind of like reacting to that, and there were even some Hollywood studios back in the day, even some Hollywood producers that felt like Disney was not the right choice for George Lucas to sell Star Wars to. Basically, it was a real big controversy back then. I remember back in 2012, when Disney bought out Lucasfilm, and George handed it all over to Disney, that a lot of fans right off the bat, including myself, the minute I heard that news, I was like, oh, that doesn't sound too great. I mean, they're most likely gonna Disneyfy it. And that's kind of like a subconscious thought that everyone had, or even like a conscious thought. But what's interesting about this, too, everything related to Kathleen Kennedy are these major Hollywood studios actually standing up against Kathleen Kennedy, and especially now Frank Marshall, because it's looking bad on him because he's married to Kathleen Kennedy, and we know that back then they were like the two big ones that worked on many big movies, and they were very well a part of the Indiana Jones franchise as well, She was even part of Back to the Future. She was part of so many things that you grew up with, even E.T. to some extent. And so, we know that there's a lot of things where Kathleen Kennedy contributed to these many franchises, quote-unquote. I don't believe that she did anything, to be honest. Anything substantial. That's why Steven Spielberg left out her name on stage at the Indy 5 world premiere and didn't even mention the role of a producer or an associate producer. He just mentioned himself, George Lucas, Harrison Ford, and John Williams. And when he mentioned John Williams, she just stopped clapping. She was expecting her name to be the last one, and that was quite funny. But moving to the next big thing here. Alright, let's get to it. Now, most likely never is that she will never retire, according to Frank Marshall, as Kennedy is described to also be developing her own studio. Now, if that backfires, Marshall wants Kennedy to have an open window. This restriction for Kathy also impacts Frank Marshall, since he is the husband of Kathy Kennedy, and it's making the situation very difficult for him and other studios out there. Many studios woke up after realizing Indy 5 is about to go in a very bad path at the box office. Kennedy's plan with her own studio is to hire Leslie Headland as the vice president and also hire ex and current Lucasfilm employees to embrace to compete against all sci-fi brands like Star Trek and Dune, as well as the space opera known as Star Wars. Now, again, do I believe that she's going to eventually make this Hollywood studio of her own? That's a real stretch. I mean, she is doing this behind closed doors. We've talked about this for a good year now. It's been a very slow process for her because, look, you're also the president of Lucasfilm. You have practically no time to do something like this, so this is something that's being done progressively as like a contingency plan. And the fact that Disney doesn't fire her over this really makes you wonder, does Kathleen Kennedy know something about the Disney executives, or maybe even Bob Iger or Bob Chapek, the ex-Disney CEO? Who knows, right? Who knows? It really makes you wonder, though, why would Disney even allow somebody like that to stay over at Lucasfilm and to stay on the Disney payroll? You got me, guys. I mean, we know that Bob Iger is still trying to fire her based on the Indy 5 box office results. The only thing is, on our end, what does Disney really consider bad box office results and bad fan reception? That's my only skepticism about their plan. What numbers are they really going to look at? Specifically, what fans or type of engagement are they really going to look at? There's really no way to differentiate regular moviegoers that know nothing about Indiana Jones that's going to go ahead and see this movie as a popcorn flick, and then you're going to have the fans, if many fans even go, to go ahead and see this movie and check it out. So how are they really going to differentiate that? Well, they really can't, and that's going to be tough. So anyways, guys, I would love to hear what you all have to say about this below in the comments, and if you guys did enjoy the content for today, make sure to drop a thumbs up on this video to support the channel, and I will catch you guys next time.
Night to moon, we hear them moans again. No.